Let go, Layla commands, her voice steady despite the fingers tightening around her throat. In the dark hallway of an upscale Manhattan restaurant, Grayson Whitmore, a wealthy tycoon, pins her against the wall, hissing, "You poor little shit, have no say." Her heart pounds, but her defiance surges. She will not fall. With a lightning-fast knee to his thigh, Layla escapes, storming into the dining room to expose his assault, turning his arrogance into shame. But how will this spark a battle to topple an empire? Who is the mysterious father watching from the shadows, ready to deliver justice? Immerse yourself in a tale of courage, secrets, and redemption that will grip your soul. Do you like epic stories? Subscribe to see our latest videos and let us know where you're watching from. Will Layla be able to discover her true heritage? Will she overcome her grief? Stay tuned to find out. The Manhattan night pulsed with elegance, the kind that made you feel both invincible and out of place. Inside the opulent restaurant, chandeliers dripped golden light onto polished mahogany tables, where the city's elite sipped vintage wine and traded laughter that rang like crystal. Layla, a striking black woman in her late 20s, moved through the crowd with a grace that belied her nerves. Her sleek black dress hugged her curves, a second-hand find she'd tailored to perfection, but it couldn't shield her from the weight of curious glances. She was here as a guest of a colleague, a rare ticket into a world of power and privilege that felt as foreign as it was intoxicating. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil and roasted lamb, and the soft hum of jazz wove through the chatter. Layla's colleague, a junior exec named Mia, had insisted she attend this networking event, promising it could open doors. "You're brilliant, Layla," Mia had said. "You just need the right people to see it." Now, standing among CEOs and socialites, Layla felt the truth of her reality. A marketing assistant scraping by in Brooklyn, her dreams always one paycheck out of reach. Yet she held her head high, her warm brown eyes scanning the room for opportunity, her braided hair catching the light like a crown. She excused herself from a small talk circle, needing a moment to breathe. The restroom was down a dimly lit hallway, its walls adorned with abstract art that screamed wealth. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the quiet. She was halfway there when a shadow loomed behind her, swift and deliberate. Before she could turn, a hand seized her arm, spinning her with a force that stole her breath. Her back slammed against the wall, and a wave of pain shot through her shoulders. Grayson Whitmore, a white man in his 30s with a tailored suit and a predator's smirk, towered over her. His fingers closed around her throat, not tight enough to choke, but firm enough to trap her like a vice. "You think you belong here? Don't you?" Grayson's voice was a low hiss, his breath hot with bourbon and contempt. His pale blue eyes glinted with malice, the kind that thrived on making others small. "A nobody like you, in that cheap dress, pretending you're somebody. You're nothing but a broke black girl who got lucky tonight." Layla's pulse thundered in her ears, her chest heaving as fear clawed at her insides. She knew Grayson by reputation, a real estate mogul whose charm masked a ruthless streak. They'd met briefly earlier, his handshake lingering too long, his smile too sharp. Now, in this empty hallway, his mask was off, and the man before her was raw power, unchecked and dangerous. Her mind screamed to run, but his grip held her fast, his body blocking any escape. The restaurant's buzz felt a world away. The jazz, now a faint echo. "Let go," Layla said, her voice low but steady, a thread of steel woven through her fear. She locked eyes with him, refusing to flinch, even as his fingers tightened slightly, testing her resolve. Grayson laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Or what? You'll cry to someone who cares? Look around, sweetheart. No one here gives a damn about you." He leaned closer, his cologne sharp and invasive. "You're out of your league. Go back to wherever you crawled from." The words hit like a slap, each one a blade meant to carve away her dignity. Nobody, broke, black girl. They echoed memories of a lifetime spent proving herself. Teachers who underestimated her, bosses who overlooked her, strangers who judged her before she spoke. But Layla wasn't a child anymore, and she wasn't about to let this man break her. Her fear burned into something hotter, something fiercer. She'd faced men like Grayson before, men who thought their wealth gave them the right to own her, space, her worth. Not tonight. Her hands, trembling but sure, found his wrist. She dug her nails into his skin, not enough to draw blood, but enough to make him wince. "I said let go," she repeated, her voice rising, sharp as a whip. Grayson's smirk faltered, and in that split second of surprise, Layla acted. She drove her knee into his thigh, not aiming for pain, but for freedom. He grunted, his grip loosening as he staggered back, his polished shoes slipping on the marble. Layla didn't hesitate. She shoved past him, her heart pounding like a war drum as she burst out of the hallway into the main dining area. The room seemed to freeze, conversations halting as eyes turned toward her. Waiters paused mid-step, and the jazz felt suddenly too loud. Layla stood at the edge of the crowd, her chest heaving, her dress slightly askew, but her chin lifted in defiance. She could feel the weight of their stares, some curious, some judgmental. But she didn't care. This was her moment, and she would not be silenced. "Grayson Whitmore just assaulted me. Just..." Her voice rang out, clear and unyielding, slicing through the murmurs. Gasps rippled through the room, forks clattering against plates. "He pinned me against the wall, choked me, and called me a nameless nobody because I'm black and not rich like him. Is this who you all dine with? A coward who attacks women?" The silence was deafening, the air thick with shock. Phones emerged from purses and pockets, discreetly recording. A woman in a pearl necklace whispered to her companion, her eyes wide. A waiter approached Layla, his face etched with concern. "Ma'am, are you okay? Shall I call security?" he asked softly. Before Layla could answer, Grayson emerged from the hallway, his face flushed with rage, his tie askew. He tried to muster his usual charm, flashing a tight smile at the crowd. "She's exaggerating," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "Just a misunderstanding." But the room wasn't buying it. The whispers grew louder, the stares colder. A man in a tuxedo stood, his phone still raised, and shook his head in disgust. Layla met Grayson's gaze, her eyes burning with a fire he hadn't anticipated. She saw the flicker of panic in him, the realization that his power wasn't absolute, not here, not now. "No misunderstanding," she said, her voice quieter but no less fierce. "You thought you could scare me, humiliate me. You're wrong." Grayson's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. For a moment it seemed he might lunge at her again, but the weight of the crowd's judgment held him back. With a muttered curse, he turned and stormed toward the exit, his polished facade crumbling with every step. The glass doors swung shut. Behind him, leaving a stunned silence in his wake, Layla stood rooted to the spot, her body trembling with adrenaline, her throat still raw from his grip. The waiter guided her to a chair and Mia rushed over, her face pale. "Layla, oh my God, are you okay?" she asked, her hands hovering as if afraid to touch her. "I'm fine," Layla lied, her voice hoarse. She wasn't fine. Not yet. Grayson's words echoed in her mind, a poison seeping into her resolve. Nobody. Broke. Nameless. They hurt because they tapped into a fear she'd carried her whole life. That she wasn't enough. That her roots were too shallow to matter. But as she looked around at the faces now watching her with a mix of awe and sympathy, she felt a spark ignite. She'd humiliated Grayson, turned his arrogance against him, but this was only the beginning. She wasn't a nobody, and she'd prove it, to him, to herself, to the world. As the restaurant slowly resumed its rhythm, Layla sat straighter, her hands steadying. The night had changed her, cracked open something fierce and unyielding. She didn't know how, but she knew one thing for certain. Grayson Whitmore would regret crossing her, and she would start by uncovering the truth about who she was. The Brooklyn night pressed against Layla's apartment window, a canvas of flickering streetlights and distant sirens. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the residue of the evenings. Chaos, Layla sat cross-legged on her worn couch, a mug of chamomile tea cooling untouched on the coffee table. Her throat still ached from Grayson Whitmore's grip, a dull reminder of the assault that had unfolded just hours ago in the gilded restaurant hallway. Her black dress lay crumpled in a corner, discarded like a skin she no longer wanted to wear. But it wasn't the physical pain that kept her awake. It was Grayson's words, venomous and precise, looping in her mind like a cruel refrain. A nobody. A broke black girl. Nameless. She'd stood up to him, turned his arrogance into public shame, but the victory felt hollow. His taunts had cracked open a wound she'd long buried, one tied to the mystery of her origins. Layla had grown up in this modest apartment with her mother Denise, a nurse who worked double shifts to keep the lights on. Denise had always been a pillar, fierce, loving, unyielding, but she'd been cagey about Layla's father, offering only vague assurances that he was a successful man who left for their sake. As a child, Layla had accepted the story, too young to question the gaps. Now at 28, with Grayson's insults ringing in her ears, those gaps felt like chasms. Layla's gaze fell to the wooden keepsake box on the table, a relic of her mother's past. It was lacquered, its edges worn from years of handling, and it held the fragments of a life Layla barely understood. She hadn't opened it in years, not since she was a teenager sneaking glimpses of old photos while Denise was at work. But tonight, the box called to her, a beacon in the fog of her doubt. She needed answers, not just to silence Grayson's voice, but to reclaim the part of herself he'd tried to erase. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid, the hinge creaking in the quiet. Inside lay a jumble of memories, a faded hospital, bracelet from her birth, a yellowed birthday card signed by her grandmother, a small stack of letters tied with twine. But it was a photograph tucked beneath a velvet cloth that stopped her heart. The image was old, its edges curling, but the man in it was unmistakable, a tall black man in a tailored suit, standing beside a sleek private jet. His smile was confident, his posture commanding, and he was shaking hands with a group of executives in what looked like a corporate ceremony. Layla turned the photo over, her breath catching at the handwriting in her mother's neat script. James Carter. The 95 James Carter. The name sparked a flicker of recognition, though she couldn't place why. Her pulse quickened as she reached for her laptop, the glow of the screen casting shadows across her face. She typed the name into the search bar, her fingers hesitant, as if afraid of what she might find. The results loaded instantly, a cascade of articles, profiles, and images. James Carter was no ordinary man. He was the CEO of Carter Aviation, a global aerospace empire valued in the billions. The photos showed him at galas, on magazine covers, his presence magnetic even through a screen. But it was a profile from a business journal that made her chest tighten. Carter, a self-made titan, rose from humble beginnings to dominate the industry, known for his secrecy and strategic brilliance. Layla leaned back, her mind racing. Could this be her father? The man who'd left her and her mother to chase this empire? The dates aligned. 1995 was the year before she was born. But why would Denise keep this secret? And why had James never reached out? The questions churned, each one sharper than the last, but they didn't erase the spark of possibility. If James Carter was her father, then Grayson's taunts were lies. She wasn't a nobody. She had roots, a legacy, even if it was one she didn't yet understand. She dug deeper into the box, her hands moving with urgency. A letter, its envelope brittle with age, caught her eye. The postmark was from 1997, addressed to Denise in her mother's old handwriting. Layla hesitated, her thumb brushing the seal. Opening it felt like crossing a line, but she couldn't stop now. The letter was brief, written in a hurried scrawl. Denise, I'm sorry for the silence. I had to leave to protect you and Layla. The world I'm building is too dangerous for you both. I'll always watch over her, I promise. James. Layla's breath hitched. The words confirmed her suspicion but opened a new wound. Protect them. From what? And how could abandoning them be protection? She thought of her mother's late nights, the way Denise's eyes would cloud over when Layla asked about her father. Had Denise carried this secret alone, shielding Layla from a truth too heavy for a child to bear? The letter trembled in her hands, and for a moment Layla felt a surge of anger, not at Grayson, but at the man who'd left her to face a world that judged her for what she lacked. She set the letter down, her gaze drifting to the window. The city outside was alive, its lights a constellation of dreams and struggles. Layla had always fought to prove herself, to rise above the labels others pinned on her. She'd earned her marketing degree through scholarships and grit, landed a job despite the odds, and held her own in rooms where she was the only black woman. But Grayson's attack had shaken her, not because she believed his words, but because they echoed a fear she'd never voiced, that her past was a void, a blank space that left her vulnerable. The photo of James Carter stared up at her, his smile both a challenge and a promise. Layla's fingers traced the edges, her mind wrestling with what to do next. She could call her mother, demand answers, but Denise was working the night shift and Layla wasn't ready to face that conversation. Instead, she turned back to her laptop, diving into the digital trail of James Carter. She scoured articles, social media, and anything that might reveal more. A forum post from an aviation enthusiast mentioned Carter's private nature, hinting at properties and investments kept off public records. Another article described his rise from a small-town mechanic to a billionaire, a story of ambition that felt both inspiring and distant. As the hours ticked by, Layla's doubt began to shift. It wasn't just about proving Grayson wrong, it was about claiming her own story. If James was her father, then she was part of something bigger, something Grayson could never touch. But the truth came with a price. What did it mean to be the daughter of a man who'd chosen power over family? And why had he promised to watch over her, yet left her to face the world alone? Layla closed her laptop, the room now bathed in the soft gray of pre-dawn. Her tea was cold, her body exhausted, but her mind burned with purpose. Grayson's assault had been a spark, igniting a fire she hadn't known she carried. She wasn't a nobody. She was Layla, a woman with questions that demanded answers. The keepsake box sat open, its secrets spilling into the light. She didn't know what she'd find next, but one thing was certain. She would uncover the truth about James Carter, about her family, about herself. And when she did, she'd make sure the world knew exactly who she was. High above Manhattan, where the city's pulse was a distant hum, James Carter stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, the skyline sprawling before him like a chessboard. At 52, he was a man carved from discipline and ambition, his tailored suit accentuating a frame still strong from years of grit. His dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, traced the glittering lights below, but his mind was elsewhere, locked on a report that had landed on his desk at dawn. The words burned in his memory. Layla was assaulted at the restaurant. Grayson Whitmore, aggressor. His daughter, the one he'd sacrificed everything to protect, had been attacked, her dignity targeted by a man who thought himself untouchable. James's jaw tightened, a rare crack in his stoic facade, as guilt and rage coiled in his chest like a storm. The office was a fortress of sleek minimalism. Polished ebony desk, leather chairs, a single orchid in a crystal vase. But it was also a command center. Behind the scenes, James Carter, CEO of Carter Aviation, orchestrated an empire that spanned continents. His rise from a small-town mechanic to a billionaire had been a masterclass in strategy, but it came at a cost. To shield his family from the vipers of his world, corporate espionage, political feuds, and media vultures, he'd severed ties with Layla and her mother, Denise, nearly 3 decades ago. It was a choice that haunted him, a wound he carried in silence, but one he'd justified as necessary. Layla, his only child, was his North Star, even if she didn't know it. James had never truly let her go. From the shadows, he'd watched her grow, her first steps, her graduation, her quiet resilience in a world that often tried to dim her light. A discreet security team, led by his trusted operative Marcus Reed, ensured her safety without ever crossing her path. Photos and updates arrived monthly, a bittersweet ritual James guarded like a sacrament. Layla's smile, so like Denise's, was a reminder of what he'd lost, but also why he'd fought so hard. She was safe, anonymous, free from the dangers of his name until now. Grayson Whitmore had crossed a line, and James's carefully constructed distance was no longer enough. He turned from the window, his polished shoes silent on the marble floor, and pressed a button on his desk. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a secure phone. "Marcus," James said, his voice low, controlled, but laced with an edge that made the air feel heavier. "I need everything on Grayson Whitmore. Now." On the other end, Marcus, a former intelligence officer with a knack for discretion, didn't hesitate. "Already on it, sir. The restaurant incident hit social media. Clips of Layla calling him out are circulating. Whitmore's a real estate. Hotshot, flashy, but there's chatter about shady deals. I'll have a preliminary report by morning." "Make it thorough," James said, his tone final. "He touched my daughter. I want to know who he is, what he's hiding, and how to bury him." He hung up, his hand lingering on the phone, the weight of his words settling like dust. James wasn't a man prone to vengeance, but this was different. Layla's pain was his failure, a reminder that his absence had left her vulnerable. He'd fix it, not with words, but with the precision of a man who'd built an empire from nothing. The city below glittered, oblivious to the storm brewing in James's mind. He crossed to a locked cabinet, its contents known only to him. Inside was a file, thin but meticulously organized, labeled simply Layla. It held milestones, report cards, a photo of her at a college debate, a newspaper clipping about her community work, but also security logs, tracking her movements to ensure she was safe. James flipped to the latest entry, a grainy still from the restaurant's security feed, obtained hours ago. Layla stood defiant, her eyes blazing as she faced the crowd, Grayson slinking away. Pride swelled in James's chest, but it was eclipsed by guilt. He should have been there, not watching from a distance. His thoughts drifted to 1997, the year he'd left. Denise had been pregnant, their love a quiet refuge in a world that demanded more than James could give. His aviation startup was teetering. Enemies were circling, and a rival had threatened his family to force a buyout. Leaving was the only way to keep them safe, to build a legacy that would outlast the threats. He'd sent money, ensured their rent was paid, but Denise, proud and fierce, had refused his help, wanting Layla to grow up untainted by his world. James had honored her wish, but he'd never stopped watching, never stopped loving. Now Grayson Whitmore had shattered that delicate balance. James sat at his desk, the city's glow casting long shadows across the room. His computer chimed, and a secure email from Marcus appeared. The subject line, "Whitmore, initial findings." James opened it, his eyes scanning the text with predatory focus. Grayson, 34, had built a real estate empire on charm and connections, but whispers of fraud dogged him. Offshore accounts, questionable partnerships, and a penchant for excess. Private jets, yachts, parties that cost more than most people's homes. Marcus noted a lead, a disgruntled ex-employee willing to talk about irregularities in Grayson's books. It was a thread, thin but promising, and James knew how to pull it until the whole tapestry unraveled. He leaned back, his fingers steepled, the orchid on his desk a silent witness to his resolve. Grayson wasn't just a bully, he was a predator, and predators left trails. James's team would dig, cross-reference, and verify until every secret was exposed. He pictured Layla, her voice ringing out in that restaurant, unafraid despite the odds. She was his daughter, not just in blood but in spirit, and he'd failed her once by staying away. He wouldn't fail her again. The phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Marcus again. "Sir, we've got something. Whitmore's been meeting with a known fixer, someone tied to money laundering. I'm sending a tail to his office tomorrow. Should we loop in law enforcement yet?" Not yet, James said, his voice ablade. We need ironclad proof. Keep it quiet, but move fast. He hung up, his gaze returning to the photo of Layla, on his desk, taken at her college graduation. She was smiling, her cap tilted, her future bright but uncharted. James had watched from a distance then too, hidden in the crowd, his heart aching with pride and regret. Now, he was done hiding. Grayson Whitmore had awakened a force he couldn't comprehend, and James would wield it with the precision of a scalpel. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the skyline in hues of gold and gray, James stood again at the window. The city was waking, but his work was just beginning. He didn't know if Layla would ever forgive him, or if she'd even want him in her life, but that didn't matter now. What mattered was justice, for her pain, for her courage, for the years he'd missed. Grayson would learn what it meant to cross a Carter, and Layla would know she was never alone, even if she didn't yet know why. The Manhattan dawn was a blade of light cutting through the skyscrapers, but in the war room of Carter Aviation's headquarters, time felt suspended. The room, tucked away on the 47th floor, was a hive of quiet intensity. Screens glowed with data, files were spread across a mahogany table, and the air hummed with purpose. James Carter stood at the head, his silhouette sharp against the city's glow, his dark eyes scanning a report that could unravel an empire. Grayson Whitmore, the man who dared to harm his daughter, was no longer just a name. He was a target, and James's team was closing in on the threads of his deceit. Marcus. Reed, James's trusted operative, leaned over a laptop, his fingers dancing across the keys. We've got a breakthrough, he said, his voice steady but charged with the thrill of discovery. Whitmore's been sloppy. His offshore accounts in the Caymans, linked to a shell company called Paragon Ventures, show transactions that don't add up. Millions funneled through dummy projects, then siphoned back to his accounts. James's jaw tightened, his mind a steel trap processing every detail. Laundering, he said, the word a low growl. What's the source? Marcus swiped to another screen displaying a web of financial trails. Real estate scams. He's been selling stakes in non-existent developments, luxury condos, resorts, you name it. Investors think they're buying into gold mines, but it's all smoke. The money gets cleaned through Paragon, then funds his yachts and penthouses. James nodded, his gaze flicking to a photo pinned to a corkboard. Grayson at a gala, champagne in hand, his smile a mask of untouchable confidence. The image fueled James's resolve, a reminder of the man who'd choked Layla, called her a nobody. This wasn't just business. It was personal. Witnesses? He asked. We've got one, Marcus replied. Elena Torres, his former CFO. She was pushed out 6 months ago after questioning his books. She's willing to talk, but she's scared. Says Whitmore has dirt on half the city's elite. Protect her, James said, his tone final. And keep digging. I want every transaction, every email, every call. He doesn't get to walk away from this. Across the city in her Brooklyn apartment, Layla sat on her bed. The keepsake box opened before her like a Pandora's chest. The photo of James Carter, her maybe father, stared up at her, his smile a riddle she couldn't solve. The letter from 1997, with its promise to watch over her, lay beside it, its words both a comfort and a betrayal. She'd spent the night scouring the internet, piecing together the enigma of James Carter. Billionaire, recluse, a man who'd built an empire while leaving her behind. The more she learned, the more her heart waged war between anger and longing. Layla's phone buzzed, a text from her mother, Denise. Home soon, baby. You okay? Layla hesitated, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to confront Denise, to demand why she'd hidden the truth about James, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she typed, I'm fine, just tired. It was a lie, but the truth felt too heavy for a text. She set the phone down, her gaze returning to the letter. I had to leave to protect you and Layla. Protect them from what? The question gnawed at her, a splinter in her mind. She stood, pacing the small room, her bare feet cold against the hardwood. Grayson's assault had been the spark, but this search for her father was the fire. His words, a broke black girl, had cut deep because they echoed a fear she'd carried since childhood. That her past was a void, that she was somehow less. But if James Carter was her father, then she wasn't anything. She was part of a legacy. Even if it came with shadows. Layla grabbed her laptop, driven by a need to know more. She searched for Carter Aviation, diving into annual reports and old interviews. One quote from James, buried in a 2001 article, stopped her cold. Success demands sacrifice. Sometimes it's the ones you love most who pay the price. The words hit like a punch, stirring a mix of fury and sorrow. Had she been that sacrifice? Had Denise? Layla closed her eyes, picturing her mother's tired smile, the way she'd always said, "We've got each other." And that's enough. But it hadn't been enough. Not when Layla felt this hole where a father should have been. She opened her eyes, her resolve hardening. She'd find the truth, not just for herself, but for the girl who'd grown up wondering why she wasn't worth staying for. Back at Carter Aviation, the war room buzzed with new leads. A junior analyst, Priya, flagged an email chain intercepted from a burner account linked to Grayson. "It's coded," she said, pushing her glasses up. "But it mentions clean funds and a meeting with a fixer named Victor Klein, known for laundering through art auctions. They're moving money fast, likely to cover tracks after the restaurant fiasco." James's eyes narrowed. "Can we trace the funds?" "We're close," Priya said. "Klein's sloppy work left a digital footprint in a gallery's payment system. If we cross-reference with Paragon's accounts, we'll have a direct link to Whitmore." "Do it," James said, his voice a quiet command. He turned to Marcus. "What about surveillance?" "We've got eyes on Whitmore's office and penthouse," Marcus said. "He's paranoid, doubling security, shredding documents. He knows he's exposed after Layla's stunt at the restaurant. Social media's eating him alive." James allowed himself a faint smile, pride flickering for Layla's courage. He'd seen the clips, her voice ringing out, unafraid, turning Grayson's arrogance into public shame. But pride didn't erase his guilt. He should have protected her, not left her to face men like Whitmore alone. This investigation was his penance, his way of making it right, even if Layla never knew. Layla, meanwhile, found a new clue in her search. A grainy photo from a 1990s charity event. James and Denise together. Her mother radiant in a simple dress, James's arm around her. The caption read, "Local entrepreneur James Carter with partner Denise Williams." Layla's heart ached at the sight of her mother. So young, so in love. What had happened to tear them apart? She dug deeper, finding a blog post about Carter's early days, mentioning personal losses that shaped his ruthless focus. The OA. Pieces were there, but the puzzle was incomplete. She stood, crossing to the window, the Brooklyn skyline a patchwork of dreams and struggles. Grayson's attack had been a catalyst, forcing her to confront the void of her past. But it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about understanding who she was, where she came from. The letter's promise echoed, "I'll always watch over her." Had James been watching? And if so, why hadn't he stepped in when she needed him most? In Manhattan, James stared at a new report, a bank transfer from Paragon to a numbered account, signed by Grayson himself. It was the key they needed, a thread that could unravel his empire. "Get this to our legal team," James told Marcus, "and prep Elena Torres for a deposition. We're building a case the police can't ignore." The sun rose, casting gold across the city. James felt the weight of his mission. Grayson's web of deceit was unraveling, but the real battle was personal. He was fighting for Layla, for the daughter he'd left behind, and for the chance to prove he'd never stopped caring. The truth was close, and when it broke, it would change everything, for Grayson, for Layla, for him. The Manhattan morning was crisp, the autumn sun glinting off glass towers like a blade. James Carter stepped out of his chauffeured SUV, his tailored coat catching the breeze as he approached the sleek high-rise that housed Grayson Whitmore's penthouse. At 52, James moved with the quiet authority of a man who'd built an empire from dust, but today his dark eyes burned with a purpose sharper than ambition. His daughter, Layla, had been assaulted, humiliated by a man who thought his wealth made him invincible. James had spent weeks weaving a net of evidence to trap Grayson, and now, with the police primed to strike, he wanted the man to know exactly who he'd crossed. The penthouse lobby was a cathedral of excess, marble floors, gold accents, a chandelier that screamed money. The doorman, recognizing James from newsreels, nodded deferentially, buzzing him up. The elevator hummed, its mirrored walls reflecting James's unyielding resolve. He'd seen the security footage of Layla's assault, her defiance as she called out Grayson in that restaurant. She was his blood, fierce and unbroken, and today he'd ensure her justice. The elevator opened into Grayson's penthouse, a sprawling shrine to ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city, modern art clashed with leather furniture, and a half-empty bottle of bourbon sat on a glass table. Grayson lounged on a sofa in a silk robe, scrolling on his phone, his blonde hair mussed from a late "Dude." He looked up, his pale blue eyes narrowing at the sight of James. "Carter," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "What's this?" Slumming it to beg for a deal. James stood still, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. "I'm here about Layla," he said, his voice low, each word a hammer strike. "My daughter, the woman you choked in that restaurant hallway, the one you called a nobody." Grayson's smirk faltered, his fingers tightening on his phone. He rose, trying to reclaim control, his robe slipping to reveal a gold chain glinting against his chest. "Your daughter?" He laughed, sharp and hollow. "That broke girl? You're joking. She's nothing and you're just an old man playing hero." James didn't flinch, his gaze cutting through Grayson's bravado like a blade. "You're the one who's nothing, Whitmore. Your empire's a house of cards, offshore accounts, fake investments, money laundered through shell companies, like Paragon Ventures. I have it all. Bank records, emails, witnesses, the police are on their way." The color drained from Grayson's face, his smirk collapsing into a grimace. He stepped back, his hand grazing the table as if seeking an anchor. "You're bluffing," he stammered, but his voice cracked, betraying the panic clawing at him. "You can't touch me, I've got lawyers, connections." "Your connections won't save you," James interrupted, his tone ice cold. "Elena Torres, your ex-CFO, is testifying. Your fixer, Victor Klein, left a trail a mile wide. Every lie you've told, every dollar you've stolen, it's over." Outside, sirens wailed, faint but growing louder, a chorus of inevitability. Grayson's eyes darted to the window, his breath shallow. He opened his mouth to retort, but the words died as the reality hit. The sirens were real, the cuffs waiting. James stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You touched my daughter. You thought you could break her. You were wrong." The penthouse door buzzed and Grayson flinched, his arrogance crumbling like ash. James turned, his mission here complete. "Face the consequences, Whitmore," he said and strode out as police boots echoed in the hall below. Hours later, across town, Layla stood outside Grayson's gleaming office tower, her heart a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. James had called her that morning, his voice calm but urgent. "Come to Whitmore's office at noon. You need to see this." She'd hesitated, still grappling with the revelation of her father's identity, but the chance to see Grayson fall was a pull she couldn't resist. Her black coat shielded her from the autumn chill, but nothing could quiet the storm inside her. Anger, hurt, and a flicker of empowerment that had grown since the restaurant. The office lobby was sterile, all glass and chrome, a monument to Grayson's ego. Layla's heels clicked as she followed a security guard to the executive floor, her mind replaying the hallway assault. Grayson's hand on her throat, his venomous words. A nobody. She'd fought back then, but today she'd watch him unravel. The elevator opened to chaos, employees whispering, phones buzzing, the air thick with tension. At the center of the open plan office, Grayson stood behind his desk, his face pale, his tie askew. Police officers flanked him, one holding a stack of documents, another with cuffs at the ready. Layla stayed at the edge of the room, her presence unnoticed amid the frenzy. Grayson's eyes scanned the crowd, desperate, until they landed on her. Recognition hit and his bravado flickered, replaced by raw fear. "Layla," he said, his voice breaking as he stepped toward her, only to be stopped by an officer. He sank to his knees, his hands clasped. "Please, I didn't mean it. I was drunk, angry. Don't let them do this." The room went quiet. All eyes on Layla. She felt the weight of their stares, but her focus was on Grayson, the man who'd tried to crush her spirit. Memories flooded back, the pressure of his fingers, the sting of his insults, the fear that had gripped her in that hallway. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She stepped forward, her voice steady, cold as winter. "Karma's a mirror, Grayson. You sowed this. Every lie, every hurt, every hand you raised against me. Now you reap." Grayson's shoulders slumped, his plea dissolving into a whimper as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. The officers led him toward the elevator, his head bowed, his empire reduced to whispers and headlines. Layla watched, her heart pounding, not with triumph but with a quiet release. She'd faced him, not as a victim, but as a woman who'd reclaimed her power. The employees parted as she turned to leave, their murmurs a mix of awe and curiosity, but she didn't care. This wasn't about them. It was about her. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent to the drama within. Layla paused on the sidewalk, her breath visible in the cool air. James's call had been brief, but his words lingered. "You need to see this." He'd orchestrated this, she knew, his shadow looming larger with every revelation. She wasn't ready to face him, not yet, but for the first time she felt a flicker of gratitude. He'd given her this moment, this chance to see Grayson fall, but it wasn't enough to erase the years of absence, the questions still burning. In her heart, as she walked away, the tower's glass facade reflected the sky, a canvas of possibilities. Grayson was finished, his lies exposed, but Layla's journey was far from over. She'd stood tall today, but the truth about her father, about herself, was still out there, waiting to be claimed, and she would find it no matter the cost. The Manhattan skyline shimmered under a late October sun, its towers catching the light like beacons of promise. Layla stood at the edge of a bustling midtown street, her breath visible in the crisp air, her heart a quiet drumbeat of anticipation. The events of the past weeks, Grayson Whitmore's assault, his downfall, the revelation of her father's secret empire, had left her changed, as if she'd shed an old skin. Today was her first day at a new job, a marketing role at Horizon Creative, a prestigious firm known for its bold campaigns. The opportunity had come through a friend of James Carter, her elusive father, a gesture she accepted with cautious gratitude. As she adjusted her tailored blazer, Layla felt the weight of a fresh start, but also the shadow of questions still unanswered. The Horizon office was a vibrant contrast to the sterile glass of Grayson's world. Exposed brick walls, colorful, murals and open desks buzzed with creative energy. Layla's new boss, a sharp-witted woman named Priya, greeted her with a warm handshake. "We've heard great things," Priya said, her eyes crinkling. "Your portfolio's impressive, and your story, well, let's just say you're a fighter." Layla smiled, the compliment landing softly but stirring a flicker of pride. She'd fought, yes, against Grayson's cruelty, against the doubt he'd planted. Now she was here to prove she was more than her past. Her first task was a team project, a campaign for a sustainable fashion brand. As she settled into a meeting room, her gaze caught on a man across the table, Ethan, a graphic designer with warm hazel eyes and a disarming smile. His white skin contrasted with his dark curls, and his casual button-down suggested ease in a room of ambition. "Layla, right?" he said, leaning forward. "I saw your pitch deck. That color palette idea, bold. I'm stealing it for the visuals." His tone was playful, but his respect was genuine, and Layla felt a spark of connection, something she hadn't allowed herself in years. The meeting unfolded with a rhythm that felt natural, Ethan's ideas meshing with hers like notes in a song. He sketched concepts on a tablet, his hands quick and sure, while Layla outlined a narrative that wove empowerment into the brand's ethos. Their banter flowed effortlessly, his quiet humor easing the tension she'd carried since the restaurant incident. When the meeting ended, Ethan lingered, offering to grab coffee from the office's sleek machine. "You're new, so I'm obligated to show you the good stuff," he said, grinning. Layla hesitated, then nodded, sensing something safe in his presence, something kind. Over coffee, they talked. Not about work, but about life. Ethan shared his love for hiking, his roots in a small upstate town, and his belief that design could change perspectives. Layla found herself opening up, not about Grayson or James, but about her childhood in Brooklyn, the way her mother's laughter could light up a room. "Sounds like she's your hero," Ethan said, his gaze steady. Layla nodded, her throat tight. "She is, always has been." The moment felt like a bridge, small but significant, connecting her past to this new chapter. Days turned into weeks, and Layla settled into Horizon. The work was demanding but exhilarating, a canvas for her creativity. She led pitches, brainstormed with Ethan, and earned nods from colleagues who saw her as a peer, not a curiosity. Yet Grayson's shadow lingered. At night, in her apartment, she'd replay the assault, his hand on her throat, his venomous words. A nobody. She'd silenced him, watched his empire crumble, but the scars remained, a reminder of how close. She'd come to believing him. Her victory in that office, seeing him beg, had been a release, but it hadn't healed the deeper wound, the fear that she was still searching for her place. James's role in Grayson's downfall was another knot. In her heart, he'd called her after the arrest, his voice measured but heavy. "I hope you saw what you needed to, Layla." She'd thanked him, her words clipped, unsure how to feel about a father who'd acted from the shadows. The job at Horizon was his doing, a connection through a friend, but it felt like a transaction, not a bond. She wasn't ready to face him, not when her mother's silence about him still stung, not when she was still piecing together who she was. Ethan became a steady presence, a counterpoint to her turmoil. Their coffee breaks stretched into lunches, then after-work walks through Central Park, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. He listened when she shared bits of her story, not the full weight of Grayson or James, but the edges, the hurt of being underestimated. "You're not what anyone says you are," Ethan told her one evening, his voice earnest as they sat on a park bench. "You're Layla. That's enough." His words landed like a balm, and when his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. It was tentative, this spark of romance, but it felt like sunlight after a long storm. Layla's new life at Horizon was a canvas, but it was Ethan who added color. He challenged her in meetings, celebrated her wins, and shared quiet moments that made her feel seen. One day, as they worked late on a campaign, he showed her a sketch, a woman with Layla's braided hair standing tall against a city skyline. "It's you," he said, shy but proud. "The way I see you." Layla's eyes stung, not with pain, but with the realization that she was building something real, something hers. Yet the past wasn't gone. At night, she'd stare at the photo of James Carter, the letter promising to watch over her. She'd learned more online, his sacrifices, his enemies, the empire he'd built to protect his family. But protection wasn't present, and Layla wrestled with the void he'd left. She thought of her mother, Denise, working late shifts. Never. Complaining, always shielding her. Denise had known about James, kept his secret, but why? Layla needed answers, not just about her father, but about herself, her strength, her worth. One evening as she walked home, the city alive with honks and laughter, Layla felt a shift. Grayson was gone, his lies exposed, his power stripped. She'd stood in his office, watched him beg, and claimed her victory. But this job, this life, this quiet warmth with Ethan, it was more than revenge. It was a beginning. She wasn't just James's daughter or Denise's pride or Grayson's target. She was Layla, carving her path, learning to trust her heart again. She stopped at a street corner, the skyline glowing against the dusk. Ethan had invited her to a gallery opening tomorrow, a small step towards something deeper. She smiled, thinking of his sketch, his steady gaze. The future was uncertain. James loomed, questions unanswered. But for the first time, Layla felt ready to face it. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was building on it, brick by brick, and no one could take that from her. The upstate New York farm stretched like a painting under the October sky, its rolling hills ablaze with crimson and gold. Layla stood at the edge of a weathered wooden fence, the scent of hay and earth mingling with the crisp autumn air. Her boots sank slightly into the soft ground, grounding her in a moment that felt both timeless and fragile. She'd chosen this place, a quiet retreat far from Manhattan's clamor, for a meeting that had loomed in her heart since she'd uncovered her father's identity. James Carter, the billionaire who'd shaped her life from the shadows, was coming to face her, and Layla wasn't sure if she was ready for the weight of what lay ahead. The past months had been a crucible. Grayson Whitmore's assault, his cruel words, a nobody, a broke black girl, had sparked a fire in Layla, leading her to unearth the truth about James, the man who'd left her and her mother, Denise, to build his aviation empire. His role in Grayson's downfall, orchestrating the exposure of a web of fraud, had given Layla closure, but it hadn't healed the ache of his absence. Her new job at Horizon Creative, her budding romance with Ethan, had anchored her, but this meeting was the final piece, a chance to confront the past and decide what her future would hold. A black SUV rolled up the gravel path, its sleek lines out of place among the rustic barns. Layla's pulse quickened as James stepped out, his tailored coat catching the breeze, his dark eyes scanning the landscape until they found her. At 52, he carried the weight of his years, lines etched around his mouth, a weariness in his posture, but his presence was still commanding, a man who'd bent the world to his will. Yet as he approached, his steps hesitated, as if unsure of his welcome. Layla stood taller, her braided hair catching the sunlight, her expression a mix of resolve and vulnerability. "Layla," James said, his voice low, thick with an emotion he rarely showed. He stopped a few feet away, his hands at his sides, as if afraid to reach out. "Thank you for asking me here." She nodded, her throat tight, the words she'd rehearsed suddenly elusive. The farm was neutral ground, a place where the city's noise couldn't drown out the truth. She'd needed this distance, this clarity to face the man who'd shaped her life without ever being part of it. "I needed somewhere real," she said finally, her voice steady but soft. "Somewhere I could hear myself think, and hear you." James's gaze dropped to the ground, a flicker of shame crossing his face. "I owe you so much more than explanations," he said. "But I'll start there, if you'll let me." Layla crossed her arms, not in defiance but to hold herself together. "Start with why," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "Why did you leave us? Why let me grow up thinking I didn't have a father when you were out there watching me?" The question hung between them, heavy as the autumn clouds. James took a breath, his shoulders sagging as if unburdening a weight he'd carried for decades. "I left to protect you and your mother," he said, his voice raw. "I was nobody then, just a mechanic with a dream and enemies who'd do anything to stop me. When your mother was pregnant, a rival threatened you both to force me out. I had to choose, stay and risk your lives or leave and build something strong enough to keep you safe. I chose the latter, but it cost me everything that mattered." Layla's chest tightened, the words stirring a mix of anger and sorrow. Thought of Denise, her mother's tired hands, her fierce love that had filled the void James left. "You sent money," she said, her voice rising. "You had people watch me, but I needed you, not your empire, not your protection. I needed my father." James flinched, the words cutting deeper than any boardroom defeat. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. I told myself I was doing right by you, keeping you out of my world. Corporate wars, threats, lies. But I was wrong. I saw you grow, Layla. Your strength, your fire. And every moment I stayed away, I lost a piece. Myself. When I heard about Whitmore, what he did to you, he paused, his hands clenching. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The mention of Grayson sent a shiver down Layla. She saw his face, his hand on her throat, his begging as the cuffs closed around him. James had dismantled him, not for glory, but for her. It was a gift, but it didn't erase the years of absence. You gave me justice, she said, her voice softer now. But you can't give me back those years. I grew up wondering why I wasn't enough. You were always enough, James said, stepping closer, his eyes glistening. You're my daughter, Layla. I watched you from afar. Your graduation, your debates, the way you fought for others. I stayed away because I thought it was safer. But I was a coward. I'm so proud of who you are, and I'm so sorry I wasn't. There to tell you. The words landed like a tide washing over Layla's defenses. She thought of her mother's silence, the letter promising James's protection, the photos that held a love she'd never known. She thought of Ethan, his steady warmth, the sketch he'd drawn of her standing tall. She'd built a life despite the void, but now, facing her father, she saw the man behind the myth. Not a titan, but a human, flawed and aching. I needed you, Layla said, her voice trembling but clear. But I also needed to find myself. Grayson tried to break me and you helped me fight back. That's a start. She paused, the wind carrying her words across the hills. I forgive you, Dad. Not because it's easy, but because I want us to build something now. Together. James's face softened, a tear tracing his cheek, the first Layla had ever seen. I don't deserve it, he said, but I'll spend the rest of my life earning it. They stood in silence, the farm's quiet wrapping them like a promise. Layla felt the weight of her past lift, not gone but lighter, a story she could carry without breaking. She thought of Horizon, her work, and the way Ethan's laughter made her heart sing. She was no longer just James's daughter, or Denise's pride, or Grayson's target. She was Layla, whole and free, her future a canvas she'd paint herself. As James stepped closer, offering a tentative smile, Layla met his gaze, her smile small but real. The hills stretched before them, vibrant and endless, a reminder that endings were also beginnings. She was ready for love, for truth, for a life that was hers. And as the sun dipped lower, casting gold across the land, Layla knew she'd never walk alone again. As Layla's journey fades into the golden hills, we're left with her triumph, a woman who faced her past, reclaimed her power, and forged a future on her terms. What did Layla's story spark in you? Did her courage inspire you, or did James's redemption move you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how this tale resonated with you, wherever you're listening. A huge thank you for joining us on this emotional ride. Your support fuels our stories, so hit that subscribe button for more tales of strength and heart. Until next time, keep chasing your freedom, and we'll meet again soon with another story. To captivate your soul, stay bold, stay true. See you in the next chapter.